All right. So today's session, we would be going for state of a component. There's a topic which is basically a component state, and the implementation that we'd be doing for the state of the component is essentially form handling. So we'd see how that state of the component acts out, and what decision do you have to make if you want to go for a functional component or a class component. All right. So let me just create today's folder, and I would just get the GitHub repository cloned. Let me just go to github.com. So I'll just clone this out. And I have provided this code to you. The GitHub repository link as well is provided. And once I complete today's session, I'll be adding this code as well to the GitHub repository. So you'd get it anyways. And also you'd have versions of the codes day-wise on GitHub as well. All right. So you can then later on you can fork this repository and then do your own modifications. And if you want, you can request a PR. I can just merge the code. That'll be really great that way. And that way, we can collaborate. Anyway, so right now, if you check out my directory structure, there's no node modules folder. And of course, if that is the case, then if I go for something like npm yarn start, all right, because I'm using yarn, you'd find that this would not work. All right. So in order to get that node modules folder in, either I go for npm install or I go for yarn install or yarn simply. And because I'm using the yarn package manager, I would just go with yarn. But if you're using the npm package manager, then you need to go with npm install. That would install all the dependencies, and that would create the node modules folder for you. All right. You can see that node modules is already created now. And once the dependencies are installed, we'll be able to start the project. Meanwhile, let me take the topics from here. And this, I don't think we'll need this file today. Maybe the document file might not be needed. Or maybe it might be needed. Let's see. So as far as today's agenda is concerned, we would like to go for, we already make the list dynamic through the task list variable, and we would like to go for the add task functionality. All right, that is pretty much related to form handling. But the eventual task form that we would create, it would not be the final way of creating or final way of handling forms in React. What we are focusing primarily is what is the state of a component. All right. And then maybe if time permits, we can go for one other form handling that will actually be the way that we handle forms in React if we don't use any other library. All right. So this add task functionality, more than form handling, it is where we understand the state of a component. And I would like to also write certain things down regarding the state of the component as well. All right. So we'll see what the state of a component is and all. But before that, let's just check our project. So I think that's installed. If I go for yarn start, this should start up my project. And I'd also open it in my editor. This opens up a browser for us as well. Let's wait for this to get opened. And as far as the diagram is concerned, the flow of the data, it goes like this. We have this list of tasks that is created on the top level, that is the task manager component, and then we are passing it down to the task list, and task list looping through the list of tasks, it is passing it down to the task item one at a time. So this is the flow. Now, what I want to do today is definitely I would like to make the task form functional. But more importantly, I like to have the add task function inside the task manager. All right. And this add task would basically add a task. So we have a task array, we'd have a task add function in the same function, so that this function can actually control the elements of the task array. And we would use the add function to get tasks added to this particular array. And this would be called by the task form. All right. So this would happen. Task form would be called by add task, and add task would add the tasks to the task array, and hopefully we get the new task added to the task list. We'll have to make some modifications in both task form and task manager components. We'll see what they are. But I believe everyone is clear on the flow that I want to achieve, right? The flow that we are going to achieve, it's clear to all? Very good. Very good. So we know that we can pass properties to the components, but this time around we'd also pass methods to the components, and those are basically the callable events. We cannot call it events technically, but those are like callable properties. Essentially, you'd be calling those properties as methods. Let's see how that goes. First of all, I'll pass this add method down to the task form. All right, so I'll start with the task manager itself, and what I would be doing is I'd be passing the add method down to the task form altogether. All right, so let's go into the task manager component first. All right, and what we would do is I would create a method add task. All right, and this is not a class component. Remember, this is a functional component, so this should be a closure. So we'd have to declare it add task. And what I'm expecting with add task is add task must have some data, and that data would be logged in the console. Right. As of now, this is what I'm expecting, that any data that comes in inside the add task, I'll just like to log it in the console through the task manager. And the task form can pass in, I can take an add task as a property itself. I actually like naming the properties and the identifiers of the properties the same, but you can go with like on add task, that kind of a event based mechanism also, like event based naming convention also, it's totally fine. But I would like to keep it simple, add task, and the value is add task. All right, so task form has this add task method, and its value is add task. We are not calling the function, we're just assigning it to the property, so that the property can be called as a function from the task form component. All right, so I believe this assignment that I've done, where I've passed the method down to the child component rather than a variable, I believe this whole thing is clear to you, right? Okay, very good. So this being done, we would like to also check out the task form. We like to do something to the task form. Let me just do an inspect element here. And in the task form, we have a property now, which is add task. So basically, if I go to the task form, and if I simply call props dot add task with some data like test, or maybe some like string on an object, doesn't actually really matter at this point. I would choose to pass some object like title, test, and description, test 1 to 3, or something like this. You can see as soon as the task form gets called, the method gets fired, and you can see that in the task manager we are getting the console log. All right, you can clearly see in my console. So you here here we can conclude that the task form, it's actually passing some data to the task manager. It is sort of a communication from the child to the parent. In the last session, we saw the communication from the parent to child. Now it is from the child to parent. But of course, we don't want to have the add task call itself right away inside the task form. Now, can anyone tell me when should this add task method be called? On click of add, okay. On button click, yes. So I can actually go for that, like on click. And now see, the problem is, like if I go for props.add or props.add task, right? On click can only be assigned it this way. Like you cannot do something like what we did in HTML, where on click is equal to, props.add task and then brackets and the value and all. This cannot be done. All right. The the way that JSX treats all the events that we go for is, first of all, on click, for example, C becomes capital. On click, that is fixed. Plus, we don't pass a string, but we interpolate the method. All right. And the method, we cannot go for the method to be props.add task. We don't call the methods like so, but we just have to assign the methods like this, so that ReactJS calls those methods. And when this type of a thing happens, it would really be difficult for us to pass some data to the add task. So say, for example, if I take off this add task, and put it inside the on click, we would not be able to pass the data into the add task. That is basically the problem. There will be an event passed, but we don't want that event. All right. So this particular problem would arise. So instead of having this particular add task specified over here, what we can do is we can create a method. I can call it handle submit. It's a submit handler, and that submit handler can have props.add task. Maybe I can just go for like data, title, and description, something like this. All right. And then I can pass in the data. And that way I can have this submit handler passed as an assigned to this on click function as an identifier. And here we now don't need to pass anything to the handle submit anyways. And we don't call the handle submit right now, but on the button click, React would call handle submit for you. So whenever you go for an event, normally, again, one more time, like when we go for HTML, it'll be like on click in the bracket, handle submit, right? This kind of an event in HTML. But since this is not HTML and this is JSX, JSX has its own rules. We don't call the event plus the camel casing happens, and the events are basically, or the methods are interpolated, and we don't call them essentially. ReactJS calls them on click. All right. So basically on the button click, the handle submit can be called. All right. Handle submit is also a function. Yes, I just created a fat arrow function over here, which is a closure function, the function inside this particular task form function. So yes, handle submit is also a function, Palak. All right. But this time around, we get this leverage to pass data inside the add task because we can construct the data in the handle submit. Later, we'd also like to construct it based on the values of the input. All right. So I believe that portion is clear, Palak. All right. Now, we can definitely do the submission on click, but a better semantic, a better HTML semantic would be on submit of the form. On submit, handle submit. All right. On submit, handle submit. So this particular submission would actually trigger, like, because this button is only, it is the button, a normal button inside a form, as HTML5 has a characteristic where if you create a button inside a form and if you do not specify the type, every button inside the form would become a submit button. If a button is outside the form, it'll be a normal button. So the default behavior of this button itself would be submit, and on clicking of the button, on submit would be triggered and handle submit would be triggered. All right. So Now let's try this. Let's see if this works or not. If I click here, you can see that it does something, but then again, something else also happens. So can you explain this behavior? What is happening here if I click on add? Showing the data in the console, but after a while, everything reloads. So any explanation to this behavior? Form submission and reload. Very good, Shubham. So basically this is submission. And since we have not specified any action over here, the form is submitting to itself. But the thing is, like, we don't have to submit a form at all because React, eventually it's a single page application. All right. So we don't have to submit a form. We'd have to prevent the submit action, or we'd have to prevent the submit event. All right. So in that case, whenever you go for an event itself, like on submit, on click, or anything, every time you get a synthetic JavaScript event, and the veteran JavaScript programmers would know that there is something called event.prevent default that would basically prevent any default behavior of any event that you are in. So this is event.prevent default is pretty generic. On submit, it would prevent the submission. On a links click, maybe it would prevent going to a different page. So event.prevent default is just to prevent that submit event. And later we'll go for an Ajax call inside this function later down the line. All right. So if I now go for add, you can see that now the data that we formed gets displayed on the task manager, sending the data from the task form to the parent, that is task manager. All right. So this whole submit handling that I did, and handle submit also, it's a custom function. You can name it anything. So I believe this that I did, it's clear to all. All right. Very good. Okay. Good. So now what we need is we need the data from the inputs. So we can go for this document.getElement by ID and form the data and all, which is possible, by the way. If I do something like, and any JavaScript programmer would right away have that feeling that we can definitely get this document.getElement by ID and we can proceed. So if I, for example, do something like const title is equal to document.getElement by ID title, const description is equal to document.getElement by ID description. All right. And then instead of this, I go with title.value. And here I can go with description.value. I can do this. All right. And this would still work as far as React is concerned, because eventually this JavaScript is something that is running on the browser, and these syntaxes are JavaScript syntaxes. If I go something like this, you can see that whatever the title and whatever the description that I enter, you get it inside the parent component. And if we want to also see, show the errors, we can show them. Like for example, I can have a span tag over here, and I can give it an ID like title error. All right. And I can have another span tag, give it an ID description error. All right. And I can get those constants here as well. Like let's say const title error document dot get element by ID title error, and const description error document dot get element by ID description error. The only problem is, like, I can then go for inner HTML, but the only problem is we are always advised not to do this. All right. Not to access the DOM directly. As long as taking the data from the DOM, it's still, not that much of a problem if you are taking it from the input. But if you're trying to manipulate the actual document object model of the HTML, it is actually quite a bit of a problem when it comes to React. But let me just show it to you first, like what exactly I need as an output. Let me show it to you, and then we can discuss on how can we avoid the usage of the document.getElement by ID. All right. So I can go for something like let maybe valid as a flag, and we'll have valid to be true by default. And if valid, I'll show the data. All right. So that is basically the premise that I'm setting. And then title dot value, I'll set it to blank. That is resetting the form. And description dot value, again blank. All right. So this is there, and in between I'll just do all the error messages. So this is one way of validation, but then there could be so many other logical ways of doing it. So if title dot value is blank, then I'll go with title error dot. Now this is a span tag. So instead of value, what do you think would be the property in here? This is a span tag that we are talking about. If you want to modify something inside of the span tag, HTML, not exactly. Text, okay, but these are all JavaScript methods that you're talking about. So it is basically inner HTML. Very good, Shweta and Rita as well. So inner HTML or inner text would also be fine. Title cannot be blank, and then I also go for valid false. All right, and then if description dot value is blank, then I can say description error dot inner HTML description cannot be blank and valid equal to false. Now this would work, all right, but we would not be doing this eventually because this is not advisable. However, if I see this, you can see title cannot be blank, description cannot be blank, and if I go for some title description, you can see this displays. I can also reset the form by going for title error dot inner HTML is equal to blank and description error dot inner HTML is equal to blank. So this can also be done. All right. So there's no problem doing this particular this sort of a programming, but I mean problem in the sense like this would work, but the problem would occur when React also tries to manipulate your DOM, because we know that as React.js programmers, we should only be manipulating the virtual DOM, while React would be manipulating the real DOM. All right. So this actual document.getElement by ID and all that is to be done only by React. All we can do is we can just change the looks and the data in this particular return statement. So we don't have to go for document.getElement by ID. And if we start doing this, then it would work, but eventually there'll be no purpose that React would be serving. And the updates of React and your updates would all clash in the document object model. Eventually you not get what you want. All right. So as React.js programmers, we should only be responsible of manipulating the virtual DOM, and we should not be responsible, or we should not be doing any manipulation to the real DOM. And I believe if you may recall in the index.js, when we went for document.getElement by ID route, I probably mentioned that it is the only place where you'd be doing a document.getElement by ID and nowhere else. And that is because this whole thing, it's the responsibility of React.js. All right. So as a rule of thumb, never use or never manipulate the document directly when it is the question of React.js programming. Always try to modify the virtual DOM with some data, and React would take care of manipulating the real DOM. All right. So let me also let me first confirm that this, what I just mentioned about the real and virtual DOM manipulation, it's all clear. And what we would like to do is we'd like to avoid the usage of document.getElement by ID in this particular exercise. All right, so that is clear to all. All right. Also, one thing that I would like to do is, this title cannot be blank, description cannot be blank. I might want to just make it look like errors. All right. So in that case, I would like to style the span. So what do you think the style would be in here? What could we be doing as the style? There is also a different way of specifying a style as well, but I'm just curious on what do you think the style should be? Color red. Okay. and like font size to be smaller than what it is right now. So font size maybe 8 or 10 pixels or something like that, right? I believe this style is something that would work, right? Everyone is clear on what is this style. First of all, this is just this is just normal CSS that we are using. All right. So if I save it, you can see that right away, first of all, it gives me an error because the style that we have specified, it is not to be specified like this in JSX. The inline styles are specified in a different manner. So let's see. In here, if I want to go for a style, I first have to interpolate the style, which means this particular brackets. And the value would be a style object, like const error style, and we want the color to be red, or you can also have the hex code. And font size, if we talk about an object, font size is not a valid object name. So in that case, it becomes a camel case. Font size 10px. All right. And then I can specify that error style object in here, like so. So what would happen here is title cannot be blank. 10px seems very small. So I'll just go with 12px. All right. Title cannot be blank. And same, we can go for the description as well for the span tag. And if you want, you can also, instead of the object itself, you can go for right, like the constant, like literal object right away in here as well, like color red and font size 12 pixels. All right. So either you can declare a variable or you can pass an object literally inside the style. So I can go for the style, same style over here as well in the below text area that we have. All right. So just keep in mind that these are not like double curly brackets or anything like that. It is just interpolation, single curly bracket, and the value of it is an object, so that you get the style added. All right. So I'd just like to clarify that these small differences on the styling, and also, you know, font hyphen size becomes font size S capital, following the JavaScript rules altogether. In JavaScript also, there is a style property where the same thing happens. So I believe this is clear to all. How do we provide inline styles is clear to all. All right. So this is there. So now this is the functionality that I want to achieve, but I don't want to use the document.getElement by ID. I'd like to avoid the usage. Here we have provided React strap style. Well, I have not provided React strap style yet, and I'm not planning to provide it also in this particular form that we have. This is just normal CSS style. So this is not even React strap. So if React strap would not be there, or even Bootstrap would not be there, this style would still work. All right. The way we provide the CSS styling, it's a different way of providing it. All right, Rita. So that is there. But React strap also has a way of going for it. And we would like to go through that sort of a styling as well, but not in this form, maybe in some other form handling example that we do. All right. So this being done, we would like to now avoid the title error, description error in this particular case. And then we would also like to avoid this document.getElement for title and description as well. Slowly and steadily, we'll just get the handle submit free of direct document accesses. All right. So we'll start with the error messages first. So in order to get the error messages displayed, it would be a good idea if I can save some variables, like for example, let title error is equal to blank, and let description error is equal to blank. All right. And what I would like to do here is these blank variables I'd like to display inside the span. So this is one technique of avoiding the usage of the document object model itself, or the document.getElement by ID, where I go for two variables, title error and description error, that I have created on the task form here. And if I, for example, do some or write some text in here, like temporary title error and description error message, if this is the case, then you can see that those title error messages and description error message get populated. So this is working. We are creating variables and we are displaying those variables in here. So if in case, if we want, we can do something like this. We can delete, first of all, the error messages here. All right. And we can get rid of this title error and description error. We don't want it. And instead of title error.inner HTML, I'll just specify the title error variable, which is this variable over here. And similarly, description error variable over here. All right. So what we did was that we declared a few blank variables, and then we just got rid of the document.getElement by ID. We are just populating those variables, hoping that they populate in the span tag when there are error messages there. All right. So logically speaking, do you think that this should work? When I hit on add without entering anything, do you think that my span tags should be populated? Yes or no? All right, Rita says yes. Ketan says yes as well. All right. Logically speaking, like functionally, it will not be populated, but I am just trying to understand that whether you're having a good understanding of the logic that I'm trying to use in here, the UI logic. Yes, everyone. All right. So if I hit add, you can see that nothing happens. It doesn't get populated at all. And we have done this. Title cannot be blank, description cannot be blank, and you would be able to, if I do a console log title error, all right, and if I hit add, you'd see title cannot be blank. That task from line number 19, the console log is happening. So which means that the title error is setting. But the problem is, and similarly description error as well, but the problem is that this return statement has been executed already while title was blank and description was blank. So the component was already rendered, and the component is basically not rendering the second time. All right, that is the problem. The component doesn't render for the second time. Even if you set this title error, description error, doesn't actually matter because this render has already happened. All right, so first of all, I would just like to make clear that everyone understands that these if conditions are occurring, but because this render has happened already and it is not re-rendering, your values are not shown inside the HTML. Everyone understands that? Very good. What about other participants? So again, logically speaking, what could be the solution to it? What should we be doing if we want to show the updated data on the UI? Re-render, right? We should re-render, yes. But the only problem here is that re-rendering in a functional component is pretty tricky unless you use a concept called React hooks. And we are not using that concept just yet. All right. So in order to re-render the functional component, there is a method which is not in the function component, but in the class component, there is a method that is available, which is called this.forceUpdate. This basically re-renders a class component. So that sort of a solution is available in class component. So we would have to convert the functional component that we have right now to a class component so that we can go for that re-rendering. All right. So let's do that first. Let me convert it to a class component. All right. I'll go for the component import, class task form, extends component. Now, because it is a class, there's no declarative syntax that we should go for. So title error, description error, they become properties. handle submit becomes handle submit like this. And here, this dot title error would be used, and this dot description error would be used. Similarly, I would like to have a render method in here. Render would return everything. All right. So a simple conversion from a functional to a class component. Here, instead of handle submit, it'll be this dot handle submit. Instead of title error, it would be this dot title error. All right. And instead of description error, it would be this dot description error. All right. So this plus what we can also do is, inner HTML is not required anymore. So this dot title error is equal to blank, and this dot description error is equal to blank. So still we are using this title and description via document.getElement by ID. We would like to avoid it in a while, but this is a class component, and we have not done this dot force update yet. All right, but we have just created this class component as a functional component. There was props used somewhere. Task form JSX. Yeah, here it should be this dot props dot add task. All right, this dot props dot add task. So by the way, if I write something and if I hit enter, this dot props dot add task is working. Everything is working as it should. All right, it's just that the error messages are still not displayed because we have not done the force update. So can you tell me the specific line numbers where we should do the force update? I'd come to that as well, Shubham. Which line numbers do you think we should go for a force update? Basically, when do we do the force update? Line number 25. All right. So line number 25 here, right? Before submission. So yeah, that is there. But if even if we want to go for a very exact point in time, we can just do a force update in here, like this dot force update and this dot force update. All right, because if the title and description errors are not to be displayed, then we would not want to do a force update, right? I believe that that line that I just said is clear to all. Like if this is not required, then why to do a force update without even any reason? I believe that is clear to all. So only and only if the data changes, we do a force update. And similarly, when title error and description error changes, I do a force update here as well. All right. So basically, whenever I'm changing the properties at any point in time, a property changes, I do a force update. This seems more logical so that we can keep track of where the property was changing and where did I have to go for inside as the force update, and the component would not be updating unnecessarily. So I believe the placement of this force update syntaxes or the force update statements, it is clear to all. The method handle submit, does it allow let? All right, so that also, and Shubham also asked, I believe, the same question, like what about let valid? So see, this let valid, again, it is a methods variable, so it's a functions variable. So if you create a variable inside a function or a method, the declarative syntax still stays. It's only the class variables and class methods, there we don't have to use the declarative keywords like function or let or const. All right, I believe that is clear to you, Rita, and someone else also asked about this let. All right, so now let's see if this force update works or not. If I hit add, yes, you can see that title cannot be blank, description cannot be blank. If I just have the title and description entered, everything would be reset. You can see again that reset also happens. If I enter just the title and hit add, you can see there's no error in the title, but the description cannot be blank, which means this force update did not happen, but this force update happened. And even if we want to just make sure that whether it is re-rendering stuff, I can just go for like inside render as a console log. So whenever a force update would happen, you can see first of all inside render for the first render, but then if I hit add, you can see that it goes inside render again. So this whole force update thing, it's cool. I mean, it goes for inside render. But the problem again here is that the force update and all, it is something that we are trying to control React. All right. And when it comes to React.js programming, we've already established that we should not try and control what React does. The DOM manipulation are always better if React takes a decision on when to update things and when not to. All right. So here force update means we are actually trying to update the DOM, and this is something that we were anyways trying to avoid. All right. So this is not a good practice anyways, because React has its own way of updating things, and in the middle, if we go for force update, it might just mess up with what React has to offer. All right. So this again, not a good practice. But one thing I believe is clear to all, that whenever some data is modified, the component has to be re-rendered so that that updated data is being shown. And Shubham also asks the same thing, like, is multiple force update good? Or if we do it once, that will be fine. I mean, once or multiple force update, it is not good at all, Shubham. It is just the plan B, you may say. Like when nothing works, and you have no option at all, you can go for a force update, but that is still not good because React has its own processes going on in the background, the DOM manipulations, all those things. And then in the middle, if we give a force update command, it'll just mess up things, or it will just stop, deteriorate the integrity of your UI. It'll not give you the output that you're expecting. So it is, as a programmer, it is our job to just let React decide on when to update. And what we would do for that is we would use the state of a component. All right. So state of a component, it is a special variable inside a component, which when changed, React would update the DOM automatically. All right. Or React would re-render the component automatically. We don't have to make a decision on when to re-render. All right. When exactly to re-render. When the right time comes, React itself knows when to re-render. All right. So it is better that instead of using force update, we use state of a component, so that whenever the state changes, the component would re-render. All right. So I believe you get your answer on that, Shubham. The answer is, like, we should not take a decision on when to re-render as a thumb rule. All right. But still, React provides you this facility. It's just that we should not overuse it. All right. So we would be going for the state of a component. State of a component is decided as, like, the variable name for the state of a component is state itself. State should be used as this.state, and this is a fixed word inside a component. Like when we talk about a class component, all right, this.state, it's like same as this.props. This.props is also fixed, and this.state is also something that is fixed. There's no other name that you can provide for a state. And by the way, if you want to use a state, we can use it in two ways. One is if your component is a class component, and the second way is if it is a functional component with React hooks. Now, React hooks, it's a fairly new concept. It's been implemented probably from React 16.8, which is like a very latest version, maybe before some versions, like probably towards the beginning of this year or maybe end of last year was this introduced. And that gave the functions capability to go for state maintenance. But before that, class components were used. So in the current scenario, both class and functional components both go for the states of the component itself. But we are not going for the React hooks as a topic. We're just studying class component right now. So class component will use this dot state, and then there is another function, this dot set state, that we'll be using. When we go for React hooks, you would see that functions are also capable of handling the state, which was not possible previously. So in all the projects these days, you'd find both class and functional components used. But in future, I think that functional components would be the only ones that we'd be using, because they now have the capability of a class component as well. But then again, we'll see how the trend goes. But functional components with React hooks are widely accepted by the React.js developers these days. However, we'd have to learn both of the things. All right. So whenever a state changes, the component automatically re-renders, and it is React that takes that decision. So we are now free of that decision making on when to re-render. All right. So that is a general rule as far as the state of a component is concerned. So let's use the state of a component rather than this force update thing. Let's use the state of a component, and in which I would like to declare a state inside a class where inside a class state is always an object. All right. If you're talking about a class component, state is always always an object. So if I want to go for state, it'll be something like this: title error blank and description error blank, and I can get rid of these properties. All right. So, and the name of the variable or the name of the property should be state. All right. It should be nothing else. So title error, description error are two keys of this state object. And if we go to our render method, I can destructure those keys in here, like const title error description error is equal to this dot state. I'm taking it from the state of the component, and I would not go for this dot title error, but I can simply go with title error, the variable itself, and description error, the variable itself. All right. So as far as the output is concerned, if I go for something written in here, you'd see that those values would be populated inside as error messages. All right. So state, that way it's a simple property that is working, but it's a special property that whenever you change the state, the component would re-render automatically, and we don't have to go for this dot force update altogether. So let me get rid of this force update and this as well, and I'll get rid of this as well, and these also would not be necessary. All right. And here we would be setting the state. So can anyone tell me that if we're talking about the title error from the state, what do I type in here so that I can modify the title error of the state? How do I access the title error essentially? This dot state dot title error. All right. So this dot state dot title error, something like this can be done, like title error, title cannot be blank, something like this. All right. And now once I do this, it gives us a warning: do not mutate the state directly, use set state instead. So this set state function, as you know, that whenever the state changes, it is React that takes a decision on when to re-render the component. It is based on the set state method altogether. So in order to make the full use of the state itself, we should not set the state directly in here, but we should use set state. All right. So I would like to also put that inside as a point in a class component. Do not mutate the state. Actually, it's not even a class component, it is generic. Even a function component with hooks would follow the same principle. We'll use this dot set state. All right. That is what we'd be following. So instead of this, I can go for this dot set state, and title is equal to title cannot be blank. All right. Now, if I do that, no warnings whatsoever. And if I hit add, just a second. Oh, it's not title actually, it is title error. So if I hit add, you can see that we have not done this dot force update. This dot set state automatically re-rendered our components. All right, so that happened. Similarly, we can go with this dot set state description. Oh, description error. right? Description cannot be blank. And then you'd be able to see that title description cannot be blank. And remember that this let valid, it is still in effect, because if any one of the errors are happening, this block would not be executed at all. All right, and hence this .props.add task doesn't happen. So that is definitely there. And here I can do this dot set state, and in here I'd go for like title error to be blank and description error to be blank. All right, so now if I go for like this, title cannot be blank, description cannot be blank, and if I add something, you can see that everything gets blank. This still is accessing the DOM, which we want to avoid definitely, but here this is coming in from the state, and of course this add happens and it is displaying inside the task manager altogether. All right, so you can see that we avoided this .force update, and we had React take a decision on when to update the state, or when to re-render the component while we request React to update the state. All right, through this .set state. So this is the first first thing that we did to avoid the document by going for state of the component for error messages. All right, so I would just like to know from all that this, what I did up till now, it's clear. Very good. And you'd also notice here that in this particular set state method, I have used title and description both as the key values, but here I have just used individual values. And that also tells you that whenever you do this .set state, this current object gets merged to the existing state object. All right, so if the title error is the only thing that is specified, then what would happen is description error would stay the same. It will just affect the title error. And similarly, here we have only specified the description error. It will not affect the title error at all. It will just persist whatever the title error is. It'll only override the description error. So there is a merge operation that is happening. All right. And here we have specified both of them to be blank. So both of them are blank in this particular case. All right. So this .set state method is in component class of React, is what Parth is asking. Yes, it is. It is inherited from the base class that is component. And can we remove line number? Which line number are you talking about, Shweta? Line number 6. You mean this 6 to 9? Well, this cannot be. This if we remove this, what would happen is the initial render would affect. So if I save it, you see that this would give me an error, because initially now there's no variable called title error, description error inside the state at all, and hence this initial render would affect. So it is better that we go for an initialization of whatever we want to have initially. So this has to be there so that our initial render doesn't get affected. All right, Shweta. So again, as a rule of thumb, it is better to have the state initialized by this particular way of doing it. Okay, so now we have that key that we can use the state so that we can avoid the usage of DOM. So right now, in order to go for the title and description as well, I'll be using the state. So what I'll do is title blank, description blank. All right, and what I go for in here is like const title description. I'll destructure it from this dot state. All right, destructure it from here, and now there is no title dot value, so it'll become just the title and just the description. And similarly, I can take off, let's say, title and description would be in here. Then we are forming the data. Title value, description value, will just get it away, and we'll have set state title to be blank, description to be blank. So now we are totally dependent on the state to get the title and description added and updated. Also, one thing that we can do in here is ES6 provides us a better way of writing this kind of things, where if the key and the value are the same identifier, so title colon title, if it is there like that, we can just use one of it and it would mean the same thing. All right, so you don't have to repeat the code. So this would mean title is title and this would mean description is description. So this is also something that I'll be using as far as ES6 is concerned. And we have already seen the destructuring syntax at a lot of places. So we'll be using destructuring syntaxes as well a lot. So I believe the change that I did with removing the DOM and replacing it with the state to get the virtual DOM modifications done and not the actual DOM, I believe these changes are clear to all, right? All right, very good. Now, if I, for example, hit add again, title and description cannot be blank, that would definitely work. But if I write something like learn state and something in the description as well, if this is the case, and if I hit add, do you think that the form would be valid and this would be displayed, or do you think that the error would be displayed? I have entered the data. Should it display the output, that is add task, or should it display the errors? Think about it programmatically and think about what we have coded and tell me. Should be one of the two. So what do you think? Should the output, Rita says it will be errors that will be displayed because the state is not connected to the title and description. That is correct. If I hit add, it doesn't matter, and you can see that the output is not displayed at all because the title and description inside the state, they would be blank because they're not connected to the inputs of the form at all. All right, so first of all, I'd just like to know that everyone realizes like why is this still not going to work, right? Everyone is clear on that? Okay, so in order for to make it work, whenever user types in something inside the input, we should be changing the state, right? So if that is the case, what is the event that we're looking for as far as an HTML input is concerned? What event gives us that real-time thing when the user types in something, that event gets fired? Jaspreet says change, Ignesh says on change, input on input is one of the events. Yes, Ankit. Rita says blur, but blur would only be happening once you leave the control. So what I want is something real time. So what Ankit mentioned, or Jasprit and Jignesh mentioned, input or on change would be better. Key press is what mentions, so that can also be there. Key press doesn't give you almost the real time data, but we can go for it. And then Palak says type, but there's no input called type. But key up is it's a good event. We can go for key up as well. But what React suggests is that we go for on change. All right, on change. And if you go for an on input, this would still work, but this would give you a warning that use on change if you want to go for something like this. So on change, and what I want is a method. I'll call it handle change. All right, and I'll put in this dot handle change. All right, in here. Similarly, in this input as well, I'd go with on change, this dot handle change. I'm trying to call the same handle change method for both the inputs. All right, so if I, for example, do some console log inside the handle change, whenever I start typing in both the inputs, the console would log that particular output that I want. But what I also want is whatever I typed in inside the input. So on change would get it through a synthetic JavaScript event. I can go with like e.target. Like if I go for e.target, you would see that you get the inputs, input ID title displayed, and if I go for description, you get the text area displayed. So event.target is a thing. You can go with event.target.value. You can go with event.target target.id. So we have the IDs, title and description, and we have the value as well. So basically title is getting us the data real time, and description also getting us the data real time. So now based on the ID, we can do set state to either the title or the description, right? So we can do something like if event.target.id is title, then I do this dot set state. Title is event.target.value. And if event.target.id is description, then I go with the same thing, but for description. All right. So now the handle change would work, and that would give us the state inside this particular component itself. And if I now try to go for this add, it will give me an error. But if I try to enter something and hit add, you get the value. The errors are gone. Task manager .jsx gives you the value of title and description. But there is one problem in here that we are facing. Errors are gone, which means this set state is happening where title and description are also blank, but the inputs are not updating. Now, what could that reason be? What should we do so that whenever something changes in the state, the inputs also update? This is a long shot. I mean, I'm not expecting for everyone to know this because I have not described what is happening in here. But if anyone knows it, I'd be really happy. Like, why are the inputs not updating, or why are the inputs not resetting themselves? All right, no one. Okay, let me tell you. Oh, okay. Shweta says we can reload the page automatically. Yeah, that can be done. But reload, it's far-fetched, right? We don't want the experience of the user to break by having a page reload. There is a simpler solution to it. All right. So what we have here is, like, we have an input, right? And on change, we are doing a handle change, and handle change is basically setting the state. So whenever the input changes, we are setting the state of the component. All right. Whenever the input changes, the state is changed, but the data is not coming the other way around. Like whenever the state changes, the input doesn't change. That we have not done yet. All right. And Jignesh has an answer as well. Input is not bound with the state values. That's also correct. So if I want to change the value of the input, we all know that there is a value attribute, HTML attribute itself. And what I would do is I would go for title and description from the state, and I'll set title here as the value, which means what happens is whenever the state changes, this value also changes. And whenever this value changes, the state also changes. So the data is going two ways. This is sort of a two-way binding. All right. And here also we can go with value description, something like this. So we are now making sure that whenever the input changes, the state changes. And whenever the state changes anywhere else, the input would also change through this value property. And these sorts of components are called controlled components. All right. So now what would happen is definitely there'll be errors. If I enter something and if I hit add, you can see that the errors go, the inputs also get reset. And that is all because of this value property that we have. And the task manager also gives you the output. All right. So this is happening. Okay. And Mikshit has a statement like we have to bind the state variables to the input. Yes. And that's what we have done. And Shubham also has a couple of points. Once we enter the value, the error still displays. Nice. That is a good point. Why we need to change the event of the text. Why we need to change event of the text field? Also because for large form it might occur to be a problem. Okay, so basically, Shubham, the second point that you have mentioned is this, right? Like every time if it is a very big form, this is going to cause us problems. I believe that is what you're referring to, because if there are 10-20 controls, we'd have to go for handle change for each and every one of them. Is that correct? Right. So there is a shorter way of doing it. Let me show you. And then I would also come to Palak's question as well. I'll get rid of this. And we know that there is this event.target.id. And all we need to do is we want to set the state, and the key should basically be either title or description. So I can do something like this, event.target.id. So what this would do is, whatever the ID is, it would dynamically populate it over here. This is the syntax for dynamically populating a key in JavaScript. This is a core JavaScript syntax. So any ID would be populated here dynamically, and the corresponding value would be populated as well. So we then don't have to do this if else, and now if we have like 10 controls, this handle change would still remain the same. All right. So that is your point number 2. I believe this is clear first of all, and this would still happen. All right. And then point number 1 that Shubham mentioned, once we enter the value, the errors still display. So yes, that's correct. Like if I start entering something here, the error should go, right? So in that case, we can do the same thing. Like I can do something like this, e.target.id plus err, because you see that the error for the title is called title error inside the state. So that's a good thing that we have named it that way, so that it is simpler for us. And then we'll just set it to blank. So whichever the ID is that we are starting to change, we'll just set the error of that ID to be blank. So whenever the user starts typing on the title error would be blank, right? And same for the description as well, right? That would also happen. Okay. So a simpler approach is dynamically populating the keys. And for that, you'd have to name your ID and your value almost the same. That is also a question. All right. So I believe that clears it out, Shubham. Very good. And Palak has a question: can't React perform a state update inbuilt? Is there any other way of handle change for the form control validation? Well, this is the only way of handle change for the form control validation, Palak. Oh, Parth was the one that has the question. So this is the only way we can go for the handle change. All right, Parth. And if you want, you can have this validation in a separate method if you want to. That can be done. All right, this could be a separate logic. And then there are so many libraries available as well for like model-based validation. Like there is a library called Yup that is available, which is also something that does validation for you. It's a model-based validation. You can check that out, see how that works. And Palak's question: can't React perform a state update inbuilt? Well, React itself cannot perform a state update. We'd have to do a set state. But then the problem, or the bigger problem why we needed value for the input, was that any inputs or any text area, any form control in HTML would have their own state. All right. So it is us that, it is React that has to override the state of that particular component. So it is an HTML5 property. Any input would have its own state, and we are just overriding the state over here. So this would work to an extent where if I, for example, don't have the on change for the title, all right, and if I start typing something inside the title, right now I am actually typing something, but nothing gets typed in, because now the title is totally in control of the state altogether. All right. So here we are taking off that controls inbuilt state, and we are overriding it with our state of the component. All right, Palak. I believe that answers your question. Yeah, so regular expression, it's all like here I have just checked like if title equal to blank, right? And title equal to blank, it's one validation, and then there is a regular expression that you can have in JavaScript while you have the condition over here. Plus there is a library called validators.js that allows you to have the all sorts of validations along with the regular expression. So there are libraries available which do that for you. And Palak says that there is a lot of manual work. But again, Palak, the whole motivation behind this exercise was just to learn states. And this might not be the actual way of form handling that you'll be doing in future. There are libraries available for form handling, but this was so that we can learn the state of a component. All right. And and that is there. Like there are so many libraries. Like I mentioned, there is a library called, let me also put those libraries in. Actually, that'll be great help. Form handling libraries. So the good ones are the ones that I'm keeping over here. One is called Formic. This is the ReactJS form library, and the motto itself is build form without tears. All right, so that is there. And then there is a validation library. Actually, I'm just keeping this. Yup, this is a model-based validation. It is a good one. There is also a validators.js library available. This one is also there. Let me just keep this repository here. Right, it's a schema builder and validator. So as an example, if I go down below, you'd see that this is the schema. That the shape of the schema is name is required, age should be required, should be positive, should be integer, email should be email, and so on and so forth. So this is also a library that people use for validation. So combination of Formic and Yup may help you to do certain things easily as far as form handling is concerned. But again, today's session, or maybe this exercise, is just so that we understand what a state of a component can do. All right. So I believe everyone is clear on how a state of a component would work, right? All right. What about other participants? I would just like to have a confirmation from everyone. Very good. So this being done, now we are sending the data. Again, coming back to our diagram, we are sending the data from task form to the task manager. So this is happening. If I send in something, we are getting the data displayed inside the task manager.jsx. So now let's go to the task manager to just make this whole thing work. All right. So if I go to the task manager itself, you see here that here is an add task, and what we are planning is based on the data has title and description. Based on the data, I'd form a new task, and that task would be pushed onto this particular tasks array. And when I have that push happening, if I, for example, do something like const task is equal to new task, and the ID can be like tasks dot length plus one. All right, not too keen on producing a new ID in a very valid manner, because anyways, this will come in from the server. And data dot title and data dot description, I go for. And if I go for something like tasks dot push task, all right, I'm just pushing a value inside the task. Do you think that this should work? Yes or no? What do you think should happen? Should it give you the new task added onto the list, or should it just stay as it is? Jignesh says no, it'll not give it. It'll not give us the new task is what Jignesh says. Shubham says no. Any reason why? State is not bound to the list page. Okay, so Shubham has a good explanation. Now I'll go to the Jignesh's explanation is correct, by the way. But Shubham says that it is a constant, and we cannot go for tasks.push in a constant. Am I correct, Shubham? That is your that is your answer, right? So that's understandable. However, one thing that we should know of is, yes, constant, if I go for like const, let's say marks is this, then marks is equal to like blank, this type of thing cannot be done. But if I do something like marks dot push, this would still be possible. All right. So in a constant, you cannot reassign a constant if it is an array, but you can push an element to an array. Similarly, if it is an object as well, you cannot reassign the whole object, but if you want to change some properties of the object, that is still possible as far as ES6 is concerned. All right. So push would be still possible in a constant. A bit of an ambiguous thing, but we'd have to live with it. So Jignesh's explanation fits more, that there's no state available over here. So if state is not available, this component would not re-render. Hence, changing these tasks actually doesn't do anything. If I, for example, do this, doesn't do anything to the list, doesn't show it as show the list at all. It'll give you that new task available, but it'll not show anything on the list. So I believe, first of all, everyone understands that why is this not working, and can anyone tell me what solution can we have? What could be the solution to it? How would we be able to re-render the whole component once we change the data? Bind state with the state update, we can define the state, and in task manager state, right? So basically it is, the answer is state, but then this is a functional component. So first, what we should do to this functional component? We should convert it to a class component. That's what Jignesh says. I believe everyone would agree with Jignesh on this, that this has to be a class component. Yes, everyone? Everyone gets that? Very good. And Shweta, specifically, you get it, right? This has to be converted to a class component, and looping would not be the answer. Is that correct? Good. So we would convert it into a class component. And this now would be the state. So state would have a property called tasks, and the tasks would be something like this. And we take off this, plus add task would not have the declarative syntax, so we'll take that off. Tasks.push would not happen, and here it'll be like this dot state dot tasks dot length, that can be done. All right. And there will be a render method. Render would return us this, and add task becomes this dot add tasks, and tasks would become this dot state dot tasks. All right. So this would not give us any problems, and even the form would work. Like if I do a console.log of task, right, this would give us the whole new task available. So let me inspect element. And you can see that the task has the ID 7, title, description, completed. This is the whole task object that we have been creating. All right. So this here we have just converted our functional component to a class component. Everything else works the same way. We are yet to do the set state functionality, but I believe everyone is clear on this. This conversion that I have done is clear to all. All right. And now, instead of doing a console log, we know that we cannot mutate the state directly. That's the rule that React gives us. So what we should do is this dot set state. And this is what I'm going to do. I want to set the tasks, and the value of the tasks is whatever the current tasks are. All right, I'm going for a spread operator, which means I'm spreading through the current array, plus I'm going for the new task to be added at the end. All right, so I'm resetting my state kind of a thing with this dot set state. The property is task that I want to reset, and I'm going through the whole task. I'm spreading through the whole set of tasks. There are 6 tasks right now, plus I'm adding the newly added task that is there. All right, and once this dot set state happens, the tasks get updated inside the state, the component re-renders, and in the task list, we would get the updated set of tasks. Hopefully, now this should work. All right, and if I hit add, you can see that you get the data displayed in here. All right, so this whole thing, it's working. So I believe now the whole functionality, the whole flow that we had from the task form to the task manager to the task list and the task item, this is clear to all, right, everyone? All right, what about other participants? Very good. So now we can actually go for the delete functionality as well, but as your component structure grows, this way of going for things would become difficult to manage. And the only reason that we did this right now was to learn certain things about state and how we can communicate between parent and child and the other way around. But this architecture or this structure itself, it is problematic. It is difficult to maintain when the component grows, which means when the hierarchy grows. So imagine if you want to go for the delete functionality, right? Let me just copy this. All right, if you want to get the delete functionality done, in that case, what would happen is I'd go with a delete method. And can anyone tell me where should the delete method be declared? And where would it be called? There will be 2 different places. One, it would be declared at some place and it will be called at some place. So can anyone tell me where should the delete method be declared and where should it be called, in what components? Anyone? On click of X, the delete must be called. Yes, it will be declared at task manager and it will be called at task item. That's absolutely correct. Rita is correct on this. So delete would be declared at the task manager and it will be called at the task item. But the problem is that the task item would not directly be able to call delete. So the calling would be tricky. It should be calling delete through the task list component. So essentially delete would be passed into the task list component and the task list would then pass delete to the task manager. And that is the function call that would happen. All right. So first of all, I would just like to understand that everyone gets the diagram that I have created, like the declaration of delete method and the calling, how it would happen. Everyone gets it? All right, very good. So now this is the problem, because if you think about a very big set of components like 10, 15 levels of hierarchy, and you declare everything on the top level component, and then you keep on passing everything down and calling everything from downwards to upwards and so on, it is a lot of maintenance. And what would happen eventually is if any one level fails to do what it has to do, then you would have to analyze all the levels, all the layers of the hierarchy, and you'd have to debug manually on what failed. So that is our problem that would happen. More importantly, it's a conceptual issue as well. This is a set of components. So basically, this that we are having, it is the view portion of your MVC. All right, this is the view portion. of the MVC. Okay, and view, basically it's React. And if it is a view, then there should be no data or data related methods inside the view at all. So that is the conceptual problem also that we have in this particular task manager thing that we're trying to do, and we have to solve it somehow. So if we want to go for the functionality without this complexity in here, what could be the solution architecture wise? We have the view. What should we be going for as far as data is concerned? Where should the data be, in what layer of your MVC? Anyone, any ideas? Should the data be in the view of the MVC? All right. Parth says model, Jignesh says maybe global state, Palak says model. So yes, it will be global state, of course, but the data should not be in the view, but it should be inside the model. The data and data related methods should be in the model layer. Model comprises of so many things. This is not the model, the task class that we created, not just that. It has so many things that we'll be talking about. But if I just make this bifurcation, right, the data and the related methods should be there inside the model, so that every view related component can easily get its own required data. So task list would get the data from the set of tasks, the array of tasks that we have, and this is not required, and the task item simply would be calling the delete method over here. So this kind of an architecture is what would be good. Now, yeah, Jignesh says that it will be something like a service. Yes. So again, services are also some things that would be the part of the model, but then again, model comprises of so many other things as well. So in Angular, this kind of an approach is services. That's correct. So this is something that would happen. And you can see now that even if it is a 10 or 15 level of hierarchy, any level wants any method from the model, they can access it right away. They don't have to be, those methods don't have to be passed from the parent to the child and so on. All right. So this one level of parent child passing will still be valid, but not multiple levels. So that's why we are taking all the data and the related methods into a model. All right. And what do you think about the model? Like, for example, if the task form wants to uh, get the model, should it be a copy of the model on the task form and a copy of the model in the task list, or should it be one single global model that every component should access? What should that be? It should be a global model, right? So that the data doesn't have redundancy, and your data has some sort of an integrity. So keeping all these things in mind, we'd be going for another library which is called Redux. For now, we'll treat Redux as our model, but then sooner or later, there'll be some other things also coming into the whole model layer that we'll be creating. Also, we are bifurcating the model and the view separately. So our view portion is React, and for now, the model is Redux. So it is at this point that we should learn Redux. And that is what we are going to learn when we go for the next exercise that we'll be doing. All right. So I think this model and the view bifurcation, it's all clear to you. And what we are going to achieve by this, or how we are going to achieve it, is the question. But this diagram is clear to you all, right? Well, Parth asks, is the model same as class with properties? Uh, Conceptually, yes, but coding wise, it will be applied a bit differently. It will be more or less something called store and actions rather than properties and methods as far as Redux is concerned. But yes, conceptually it is data and related methods, but in Redux it is treated differently as far as coding is concerned. All right, Shubham has a question. Can we go for model structure same as the component structure? That would not be ideal, Shubham, because the thing is, like, this is just one set of components and the model that we are talking about. But imagine that there is another completely different component like dashboard. The dashboard would also need, let's say, a number of tasks, like total number of tasks and all. That would also come from the same model. So at that point, structuring the model the same as components would really be a difficult thing. Model should be totally separate and should be general, so that all the other components also, not only the task manager related components, but other components also could use the model. All right. So here, now you know that Redux is important so that we can have some global data, and that global data is accessed by one or the other components. All right. So this is something that we would like to achieve. All right. And we would not start by implementing Redux right away into the task manager project, but tomorrow's session, we just learn Redux separately, because Redux is a separate library. It is not something that has to be used with React. There are other libraries that can be used with React, and Redux also can be used with other Vue libraries. So that is all possible. These two are separate libraries, so we'll learn them separately. So tomorrow's session will be only going for Redux and maybe one example from React and Redux together, but we'd not be implementing it on the task manager. We'd be doing that in the session day after tomorrow. All right. So first, it is important to learn what Redux is, and then we'd go for the whole task manager and Redux functionality. All right. So let's conclude the session by one small exercise of creating a login form, because I know that the login form would be required at one point in time. And if, for example, you are not using Formic or you're not using Yup, and still you want to create a form from the scratch, this is the way that we'd be doing it. All right. So let me just close this down, and let me just create a login form component. And as far as the hierarchy is concerned, again, if I just open this particular hierarchy, where do you think in here the login form would be? Which level? First, second, third, fourth is not a question, but what level of the hierarchy should the login form be created? Second level of hierarchy, like with the task manager itself. So we would create it through with the task manager. So basically login, register, any other feature that we want to have would be at the second level. All right. And then register and all. So as far as the UI is concerned, the header and footer would still stay the same. This middle portion would change. So instead of task manager, it will be login. And as far as the folder structure is concerned, login would be at the same level as task manager inside the folder. All right. So I believe everyone understands what we are building as a hierarchy, right? Everyone? Very good. The only problem here is that we don't have routing setup. So which means if I create a login component from the app component, for now, I'd have to comment the task manager component to see the login component altogether, right? So that is the only problem that we would be having. So let me create a folder. We'll call it login. And remember, I'm still not using any libraries. It is just one revision that would happen for the state, and some better way of form handling. If you're not using any library, you want to go for this from the scratch. So a login.jsx, and what type of component should it be? Should it be a class component or should it be a functional component? Should the form be a class component or a functional component? Anyone? Should be a class component. Very good. Import React and component from React. And now I'll be just doing code more and not be explaining anything, or maybe some things I might explain, but most of the things we have already done. So I'm just optimizing that code, all right, so that it becomes easier for you to handle forms. So what do we do in here is, let's say class login extends component, and it has a render method. For now, it will return a paragraph saying login works, and we'd export default login. And for now, I would have to comment this out. So let me just comment the task manager import login in here. Oh, components login. And I'd comment the task manager here as well. And login would be displayed. Eventually, definitely, we would like to go for routing. Right now, you can see that login works displays. And what I want is something like this. Import row column from ReactJS. So I need one row, and in which I need a column, and I'd specify some width of it as well. So call MD 5, 4. 4 would be better. All right. And we would like to have a form, of course. So what I can do is I can go for import. Oh, it's already something from the ReactJS. So form. So I can go with form / form and a button. All right, auto import it. Add button. Oh, not add, actually login. And the color can be primary. So I'll give us a button. I do want a handle submit. We also want a handle change as well. So this would be there. What I also think is we can create a form control. This is sort of a widget kind of a thing. Let me just create one. Like we know that in the task manager itself, the task form, this whole thing, form group, it is almost same. Like it is a similar thing that we have created for the text area as well. So it is better that we have this form group separately into a form control kind of a thing. All right. So this would again be a component, and I think this could be a functional component. All right. And I'd import form group input label, and then there is a form feedback. That is for the error messages. Input label and feedback from ReactJS. All right. And I'd go for form control is equal to, take in the props. All right. And this would return me a form group. And what I'm planning is that I can reuse this form control at a couple of places. All right, I'll leave it for now. But the way I want to use it inside login, for example, it is that I'm to import form control from form control.jsx, and inside the form, I would just like to use it like form control, and the properties that I want to pass in are to start with a label, let's say username, and also the type text. all right? And then there'll be a label password, and the type would be password, all right? So this is how I want to use it, the form control altogether. Let's see. Form control, nothing was returned, so yeah, that is still pending, so we'll return something. But this is the eventual usage of form control, and inside the form control I'll go for the form group and the form feedback and the input and label and all right? So I believe first of all this is clear to you, the way that I'm trying to go for it. All right, very good. So in the form control we have the props in which we have the label and we have the type, all right? And label can also be converted to an ID kind of a thing, which would basically be the for now we can go for like a label dot to lowercase, the the JavaScript lowercase function, and this would return us a form control, oh sorry, a form group which has label, which would be label for, now I'm naming this ID because it is the identification of the form itself, right? Or maybe we can name it as name as well, that'll be better. All right, so for it have the name over here, and input type will be type, and ID would be name. That can be there. So now you can see that username and password are formed, and this whole thing happens. Plus we'd also like to go for that on change event as well, because we want that handle change to happen as well. All right, but this is my form control, which also should have a form feedback as well. So form feedback, and I want to pass in an error, so should be an error which should also come from the props, which should be displayed in here, error. So we'll try to display it. We have not displayed it right now, but this is my form control, which is repeatedly used inside the task form, just, oh, not the task form, but the login form, just to make things simpler for us. All right, and this also tells you like how we can reuse a particular component. This is just one exercise that way. So I believe this is clear to all, this form control usage that we did over here. Do we need line number 2 now, which means line number 2 in which file, Rita? Oh yes, we do need it, because there is a form that we are importing. There is row column and the button also that is there. So we do need this line number 2. All right. So we'd also pass in the handle change over here, or what I can do is, yeah, handle change would be better as a name. So handle change, this dot handle change, and here also we can go for handle change is equal to this dot handle change. We take that handle change inside the form control in a while, and inside the handle change we do have that event, and we can go for this dot set state event dot target dot id is event dot target dot value. I'll also show you how to handle the errors in a while. All right, error handling would be a different way of going for it. So we do the set state. What I think the set state would be, if we go for it in a better manner, is that if the state is having data and the data is username and password, and errors would be blank, right? This if this is the state that we want, where data is represented here and errors is a blank object, rather than having those sets of variables that we have, then the set state would be a bit different. Like data is whatever this dot state dot data is plus the event dot target dot id. So basically we are again spreading through whatever the data is and then overriding only the specific id that is encountered. All right, so this is one small change inside the state that we had. So this is the way that we want to have the state. All right, so this being done, we can pass the handle change and then hit the submit. So say for example, if I go for on submit is equal to this dot handle submit, and inside the handle submit I'll have an event which we would do event dot prevent default, and we'll do a console.log of this dot state dot data. All right, let's see whether this works or not. It's just that this handle change has to be taken in as a property inside the form control. So let's do that as well. So I'll take in handle change, and on the input I can go with on change this dot handle change. All right, oh, it'll not be this dot handle change, I'm sorry, it's just a functional component, right? And if I do something like this, you can see that on the login.jsx I'm getting the value that I'm entering inside the form. So that is something that is already working. So I think the input, except for the error message display, the inputs are working pretty okay. All right, so so this should be clear, and then we can go for the error message display as well. So for that we would have a validate function externally. So validate, and inside the validate I can get const data is equal to this dot state. All right, so basically extracting data from this dot state, and let, or maybe even const errors is equal to a blank object, and I'll just return errors. All right, so basically I'm returning an errors blank object, but then again if there is any error that is there inside data, we'll populate that errors object. So if data dot username is blank, then errors dot username could be username cannot be blank. Similarly for password as well, password cannot be blank. And then there could be a bunch of errors like pattern matching and all those things can be done inside the validate function. So the way the validate function works is if there are any errors, this errors object would have some keys, and if there are no errors, the errors object will still be empty. And we can go for something like const errors is equal to this dot validate right away inside the submit to start with. And here I can count, like if errors, if let's say there is a function in JavaScript to get the keys of an object. So object dot keys errors. If this dot length, that is like object dot keys gives you an array, and if the length is 0, then this means that we should just display the data in the console. For now, console log would be fine, and we'd set the state to the initial state, that is this one. All right, so console log this dot data and then set state. And if for example there are some errors, then I'll go for this dot set state to be errors. All right, the errors that we are getting from validate, we'll be setting it inside the state of the component. So this is the combination of validate, handle submit, and handle change. Now inside these three functions, there'll be, if you add new controls, there'll be only changes inside the validate where the validation has to be added. Other than that, everything would still remain the same. All right, so I believe these three functions, validate, handle submit, and handle change, these are pretty clear to all. All right, Very good. And what we pass in for the form control, let me just put it in different lines. So label, type, handle change is fine. We'd pass in the error. Error is errors.username for this one. And for the next one, it would be errors.password. And I'll take the errors from the state. So I'll also take the data as well. So const data errors from this dot state, so that we get that errors object down here. And we know that the two-way binding kind of a thing also has to be done. So I would like to go for value as well. Value data dot username and data dot, or value is equal to data dot password. Right, so I'd also be passing the values, because handle change, if it has to happen, then the values also have to be passed into the controls. All right, so now I think if I now go for the form control, there's some changes that has to be done in the form control. Like if I enter something, still we are getting that console log. And if, for example, if I do not enter anything, then we are not getting anything. So that is all happening. If I just enter the password, still we are not getting anything because username is blank. If I enter username and password both, then we are getting the data in the console. So that display of data in the console is happening. What I can also do is, errors, because that whole error should go once we start typing in a control. So that should happen. So errors e.target.id to be blank. So I'm also setting the data and also setting the errors. All right, so whenever I start typing in one of the controls, that particular control's error should go. All right, so that is what we are trying to achieve. And this is my form control. Now only the things that are remaining are the display of the errors inside the form control. All right, so we'd go for that as well. This, however, seems complete. And now there will be very minor changes, like add a form control here and add some data over here if you want to make this form with multiple other controls. So here what I can do is, in my form control, I can set the value to be props.value. And we already have the error displayed in here. So the way we display the errors is that if, like, there is this property here called invalid in the input. And let me put it in different lines. All right, now invalid, if it is true, then this particular form feedback would get displayed. You can see both the controls are invalid, and if I hit login, these errors would be displayed. But if invalid is false, then even if there are errors, it would not be displayed. You can see that no errors are displayed. So this React Strap property invalid false is what, or invalid true or false is what we need to go for dynamically. So what do you think? What should be the condition in here? Anyone? How would we be able to make this dynamic? Or based on what variable should this be dynamic? If error, based on error. All right, I can do this, I believe. If I do this, yep, that works. All right, so can anyone explain me this syntax for error? We can go for ternary operator as well. This is a very shorter syntax than that. Anyone, any ideas? What did I do in here? Okay, if error is blank, all right, error is blank or undefined. It's not a ternary one, but it's the negation operator. So see, the thing is, like, if for example, if we have a variable a is 10, if I do not a, then what should we get is false. But if I do a negation of negation, then we'd get the Boolean equivalent of the value that it has. So if a is null, negation of negation a, what do you think should it give us? Like not a. If a is null, what should it be? True or false? Should be false. All right. And even if it is some variable, okay, b is not defined, but say for example, if we have an object like class or const student, which is blank, and if I go for student dot name, which is not defined, at that point it will give me the Boolean equivalent that is false. All right. And if let's say if there is a, let's say for example, if we declare a name, all right, and if then we go for this exclamation student.name, because the variable is there, it'll give me true. So whenever something is not defined, it'll give you false, and whenever something is defined, it'll give you true, give you the Boolean equivalent of that. And that is what this is. We are just having a negation of an undefined value, then it will be false, and if this would be defined, it will be true. All right. So I believe this now, this form that we created with the form control being a separate component and the login being on its own, this whole thing is now clear to you, right, everyone? Okay, very good. So these things would help you in creating your component structure. It will help you in making it more organized altogether. So I believe we can call it a day. And if you have any questions, you can put it in the chat. And if you don't, just say 0 so that I can conclude the session. All right, very good. Very good. Okay, guys, so this is it for today. And we'll meet Wednesday now. We have alternate days of session. So we'll meet on Wednesday, where we'd be discussing more on Redux, but not on the task manager application, but it'll be more or less a separate sort of a discussion altogether to understand what Redux is. And then in the next session, that is on Friday, we'll be implementing Redux inside our task manager. All right. So have a nice day, guys, and see you on Wednesday. Bye-bye.